Welcome to the TCJ Podcast, where we discuss curious, thought-provoking, and sometimes controversial ideas through the lens of biblical wisdom. I'm your host, Keith Wood. Joining me today is Brian Maggard. Brian, thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure.
So you've been on the podcast before, and we're thrilled to have you back. For those who don't know, Brian is our Dean of Men here at Trinity College of Jacksonville, and he is on the precipice, the very cusp of finishing his PhD in biblical archaeology. Lord willing, I don't know, maybe by the time this episode airs, it'll be done and you'll be Dr. Maggard.
I think you have more faith than I do.
I think you've got this, man. I think you're right there.
Yes, I'm scheduling the date for defense, so
that's awesome.
It is in the works. Yes.
Yeah, I hope that goes well for you and is done in a timely manner.
Thank you.
So today we're going to be discussing some more biblical archaeology, and
Great.
We're going to be thinking about false friends and maybe some false finds in biblical archaeology. You mentioned to me the other day that people will often come up to you when they find out that you study biblical archaeology, and they'll be excited and want to tell you about this extraordinary new article that they've seen about some fascinating new find concerning biblical archaeology. So what are some of those most famous supposed discoveries that people have told you about that maybe turned out not to be as extraordinary as they thought?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. I think the unfortunately, archaeology is a sub-science of anthropology. So it's a soft science. So you're dealing with a lot of conjecture, and you're dealing with a lot of theory, and you're dealing with a lot of things that may not be proven, and some of the things that can't be proven. As an evangelical Christian, I think all of us would agree that we hold to a supernatural worldview. So we believe that miracles occur. We believe that God still acts in history, and he acts through prayer and in the world today. However, we believe, I think all of us, even aside from the debate over cessationism and continuationism, I think we all would agree that miracles are not normative. So we don't see some of the events that are recorded in the Old and New Testament occurring today. So the children of Israel are not following a pillar of fire by night and a cloud by day. So we know that these things occurred in the past. We do not believe they occur today. So having said that, we are supernaturalists. We believe the Bible is true and that it's literally the Word of God. So having said that, people who I think are trying to be helpful, and I'll give you a name. Ron Wyatt was and I think he was a nurse anesthesiologist or a nurse anesthetist. I forget. I think that was his credentialing. He was kind of an amateur archaeologist, and he would run around the ancient Near East. He would run around Israel and Jordan, and he would find things. And oftentimes what he found turned out to be fairly fantastic, both in the physical find and in its fraudulent nature. So he would claim to find Noah's Ark. He would claim to find chariot wheels in the Dead Sea. He would claim to find the Ark of the Covenant. He would claim to find the lost city of Sodom. He claimed to find pillars of salt that he would say were people who had died in the destruction of Sodom. I think there's more. I can't remember all of the fantastic finds, but just about every single thing you could think of related to a fantastic story in the Bible, he would find. So the mercy seat with the blood that dropped through the cross and landed on the mercy seat underneath the cross or the side of the crucifixion, that he said he found the socket stone, and then when he was asked about it, somebody had come and dug up the socket stone and removed it, or the socket hole. And when asked about the Red Sea and the chariot wheels in the Red Sea, the joke is, and I don't remember the exact details, but the joke is the chariot wheels turned out to be hubcaps from a 57 Buick. So a lot of the things he's trying to help And he may have had good intentions. I don't know. I don't want to judge somebody's motive. But most of what he found turned out to be kind of a fraud. It turned out to be a crock. It wasn't truthful. So a lot of these stories are still being viewed on the web with great regularity. YouTube, unfortunately, while it served as a giant aggregator of information, which is wonderful, it's also served as a promoter of false narratives. So you have a lot of Ron Wyatt stuff getting out there and being promoted as factual archaeological finds when it's not true. One of my professors, his name was David Graves, he was a member in good standing on our site at in Jordan at Tel El Hammam. He's a professor up in I think he's in Canada. I think he lives in Portugal now, but he was on that excavation for Noah's Ark at Mount Ararat. They did not find an ark. They did not find petrified wood there that was in the shape of Noah's Ark. It was quite literally an object made from native stone, and people looked at that and said it was a ship. It was not. We have not found Noah's Ark. So, these kind of things get kind of tossed into common lore and then become, canonized.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be very careful. I think the first rule when you examine something, you need to ask yourself, what is the motivation? What are they trying to accomplish? And is this something that has been independently verified? I mean, can we trust what we're being told? Another very popular podcast, Joe Rogan has on his show, I think several times now. He's got Graham Hancock, who's again found some of the most fantastic things that you can possibly imagine. These steps in the desert that are in the sea that are reported to be the lost city of Atlantis. It's not. It's just limestone or sandstone deposits that lay down in flat formation, and they end up looking like steps. But there's absolutely no evidence that he's found anything even remotely consistent with an actual city. You have James Rawle, who was kind of one of the certainly one of the consultants on the very popular movie Patterns of Exodus, or Patterns of Evidence, about the Exodus. A lot of the information in there is faulty. You need to be very careful what you're looking at. I think being completely upfront with our audience, I think the most necessary skill the Christian needs to possess is a healthy degree of skepticism.
So I can imagine someone listening to this and they've heard about some of these discoveries, right? And maybe maybe they believe some of the things that they've seen, and they're listening to this and thinking, is this guy trying to undermine the credibility of the Noah's Ark story, or of Moses crossing the Red Sea?
Right.
What would you respond to that?
Yeah. No, that's very valid. I think last time I spoke here, I mentioned an author, and I got the name wrong, and I apologize. I said Harry Hoffmeyer. It's James Hoffmeyer. Wrote a wonderful book called, I think, 3 Views of the Biblical Exodus. So what they do is they take into account the biblical narrative, which is the best narrative that we have. They take that view, and then they try to archaeologically determine where that may have transpired. Now, it's important to remember, all that being said, we've excavated about 2% of the sites in the ancient Near East.
Wow.
So it's a very, very minimal amount of excavation that's actually being done. Now, what's awesome is the science of archaeology is expanding so much that we don't even need to dig anymore to be able to use ground penetrating radar and all these different tools where we can actually map underground structures and things like that in a much better way, which is much less invasive, which has always kind of been the foundation of archaeology anyway. We have to tear something up in order to examine it. So what we're seeing now is archaeologists, when they're going to sites, they're even kind of doing less archaeology over the whole site. and they're limiting their work to very specific shaft locations or very specific things that they've identified they want to find. But they're
Okay.
leaving huge sections of the tell or the ruin alone for future archaeologists who will have better technology.
Mm.
So wonderful things are happening, and I think we can be excited about the facts. The facts don't change. And here's the thing, like we said on the last recording, our faith is not in the archaeologist finding 100% guaranteed this is the Ark of the Covenant. That's not where our faith lies. We have a supernatural work where Jesus Christ says prophetically things are going to happen. And when they do, that will give you evidence that I am who I say I am. The eyewitness testimony of his resurrection affirms what we know of the story of the resurrection. It all fits together to paint this tapestry that's true. You have three eyewitnesses, each telling their own account, looking at it through a different lens, slightly different, all of them repeating the same thing. It's this culmination from Genesis to Revelation revealed in one person, the person and work of Jesus Christ. It is through him and by him all things exist. So we look at him, and he rose from the dead, so he gets to have the last word on what we hold as authoritative.
Mm-hmm.
So if he says Moses wrote the Torah, then Moses wrote the Torah. Now, does that align with what we know from archaeology? Again, we all have access to the same facts. And I think if you look at the facts, there's a very clear case that can be made that Moses is in fact the author of the Torah, that he wrote the entire first five books of the Bible. I don't think that's called into question at all. I think it's perfectly logical to say that Moses was a real person, that Abraham was a real person, that Adam and Eve were real people, that all of these things align with what we know of the ancient world. Here's the thing. When you look at the Egyptian records, which is a large part of what the archaeologists have at their disposal, those who are studying history, when we look at the Egyptian evidence, we have three basic texts that will enable us to determine chronology or dates. There's other things, but those are the big three for Egypt. You have the Turin king list, you have the Seti the first king list, and you have Manetho. Here's what's crazy. Manetho wrote his history 2,000 years after the first pyramid was built, Khufu or Khafre or whatever. 2,000 years have elapsed between, so more time, in fact, even more, supposedly. But more time has elapsed between Manetho and the first so-called first Egyptian event and us and Manetho. More time. So
Wow.
these are the three we have. So when people ask, how does the Bible square against ancient, chronology? The question you need to ask is, what ancient chronology? There isn't one. You've got some things that are recorded, but again, you need to, I think, have more faith believing that all three of these authors of the Egyptian text were telling the truth as well, because they're known liars anyway. They're not telling us the whole story. They're shading events to make themselves look good. They're going through all these things to present their side of the story, propaganda. They want their, so we get a picture, but we get a picture that they want to present, not necessarily one of reality.
Mm-hmm.
So again, skepticism, it all goes back to skepticism. We need to be very careful. The Bible, from what we have been able to determine, seems to comport very well with the ancient world. It all seems to kind of fit together very, very carefully. Even names, the names of the people that raided and Abraham chased, and all of these events turn out to be, Joseph and the slave price. It's accounting for inflation. Even the biblical text is incredibly accurate, even in the minute details. Joseph's cost versus later on, the inflation causes it to go from 20 shekels to 30 shekels, and you have all these things taking place. It seems to fit. We don't know for certain, but it seems to fit that the second intermediate period, where Egypt lost its dominance and the Hyksos invaded and came into Egypt and brought with them the chariot. It seems that they were all Asiatics coming in. That seems to align with what we know of Abraham kind of wandering in, and along with all these people who were involved in a famine. The text speaks of a famine occurring, and all of these things seem to kind of align. Again, you don't need to hold hard and fast to the actual chronologies, I think, because even the greatest Egyptologists of our day, if you look at one of our favorites is Kenneth Kitchen. His work on Old Testament is probably, I think, for the Christian, and he had his problems, but I think his work is probably a magnum opus. You look at him, he disagrees with Donald Redfield, who's the kind of the go-to guy in Egyptology. He disagrees with, so there's nobody's aligned.
Mm-hmm.
When you get back into before the Iron Age, I think you need to be very careful how you approach dates.
Okay. It sounds like one of the things that you're saying is, when we look at the biblical data, the Bible tells an amazing story. From an archaeological perspective, it seems to be very comprehensive, and all the dates line up, and it has so many details that would be incredibly difficult to fabricate. And part of that means that we're not waiting for some chariot wheel to turn up at the bottom of the Red Sea to validate
we don't need
Scripture.
Right, we don't need it.
When I teach philosophy, I teach apologetics, and a lot of what we do is we talk about arguments for God's existence. And, there is such a thing as a terrible argument for God's existence, right? Like, we could come up with some very silly arguments for God's existence. I think that one of the confusions that my students have commonly is I'll present an argument for God's existence, and they'll kind of think like, oh, well, this is arguing for my position, therefore this must be a good argument. I need to defend this argument. And I try to really impress upon them, like, no, like, there could be bad reasons for believing in God too. Like, you don't need to be married to the argument. Like, your trust is in God. It's not in some argument, right? And it sounds like there's a very similar lesson that we could probably take away here.
That's exactly right. I think the two completely overlap. I think that's exactly well stated. That's exactly the problem. You have a bunch of people who are well-meaning who want to say, hey, we've got all these evidences. Have you heard about the discovery of Noah's Ark? Have you heard about, But we do have great discoveries. We have the Dead Sea Scrolls, which take our knowledge of the Old Testament. Forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but the most current, or the oldest text we had from the Old Testament, and forgive me, I could be goofy on the dates, but I think it was around AD 900. The Dead Sea Scrolls took us back to 300 BC. I mean, it's fantastic what it's found. We have the Tel Dan stela, which is it was found in secondary use up in Tel Dan, but it's this big inscription written by the enemies of the Israelites, that King David's clan, right? I mean, we have all these extra biblical evidences, the Misha stela, all of these things that are perfectly congruent. One of my favorites is Pilate. Pilate never existed. Well, guess what? They found a big concrete slab that dedicated a building by Pontius Pilate. Again, all of these things, I think, put together, provide a great deal of context for us as Bible teachers and preachers and communicators of the Scriptures to non-believers, apologists, things like that. We have plenty of evidence. We don't need to manufacture stuff. We've got good stuff. Geography, historical geography, is an amazing, amazing tool at our disposal that we can use. Anywhere you go, you find. Jericho is a perfect example. Jericho was always thought to be, we have beautiful evidence that Jericho was destroyed, and it was weirdly destroyed, so this has got to confirm the Bible, right? Well, Kathleen Kenyon, a remarkable British archaeologist, probably one of the greatest, got in there and said, what are you talking about? This destruction layer is completely wrong. Well, what does that do for our faith? Well, again, you're entitled to your facts, but you're not entitled necessarily to interpret them the same way as I do. It turns out, and she never published her work, so we're relying on secondary sources for her conjecture, so she may not have been as hostile as we believe. But again, I think if you, and here's where those dates come into play again, if you look at what she's actually saying, her destruction layer is exactly comparable with our site at Tel El Hammam just across the ridge. What if it's, and heaven forbid, if you talk about this with people who are serious about this, heaven forbid, what if her chronology and our chronology are about 200 years off? I mean, good grief, you're talking about stuff that happened in the Iron Age. Can't you allow for 200 years among friends? I mean, not even, like I said, not even Egyptologists will agree, you know, and I think most of them are within 30 years of where they place rulers. But can't we all, you know, kind of take a deep breath and say, you know, the evidence is going to come out, but we have nothing to fear from the facts. We never fear the facts.
Yeah. Going back to the idea of some of these false finds, and I know it's hard to say what a person's motivations are, but if I can invite you to speculate, when these false find claims get spread, do you see these people as being, are they ever nefariously trying to spread bad information? Is it just sloppy scholarship? Where are these people coming from, and what leads to these things getting put out there?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think when you look at archaeology in general, we were talking before the broadcast, you know, no one wants to excavate in, you know, Morocco. I mean, maybe you do, but nobody wants to publish and read about excavations that take place in, you know, Nairobi. Nobody cares. Kazakhstan, it's irrelevant. You want to excavate the Temple Mount in Jerusalem? Now you've got some interest.
Yeah, everyone's reading that.
Now
right?
There's people that are interested. You know, biblical archaeology, when you put the word biblical in front of archaeology, you can, if you write a good book, you can increase the amount of sales that your book will generate. You know, we have very dear colleagues in archaeology who are our worst enemies. Men like James Tabor, who wrote as a biblical archaeologist, who is absolutely diametrically opposed to the Christian worldview. We have men like Bill Deaver, who wrote probably, if you were to look on Amazon under biblical archaeology, his name would be the first or second that would appear, Bill Deaver. He was a student of William F. Albright, the father of biblical archaeology. He is in the Albrightian vein, and he is a remarkable scholar. He is an avid atheist and despises, or at least appears to despise, Christianity, even though he plays the organ in his wife's Methodist church.
Wow.
He violently opposes the Christian worldview, and you know, I think his latest book was forgive me, I think it's Did Yahweh Have a Wife? You know, it's been completely debunked, but you know, I think we're dealing with the same thing we're dealing with when we look at folks who are hostile to our worldview. I think there's always a level of personal animus that may be something that only a psychiatrist can unravel. But there's also a spirit of the age that the secular worldview seeks a naturalistic explanation for every single event. So if you reject outright, before you begin, any idea of a supernatural occurrence, then the Bible doesn't make much sense. So people like Israel Finkelstein, who is probably the foremost Israeli archaeologist today, you know, believes that that David was a local chieftain that ran around with maybe 200 or 300 men and died in obscurity.
Wow.
I mean, it's completely absurd. Again, he's entitled to the same facts as we are, but he draws a very different conclusion, and one I think stretches credulity. It's simply not aligned with what we know of the.
Yeah, so there are people there who, because they're beginning with that naturalistic worldview, they're just precluded from coming to the same to the conclusions that a Christian would want to draw. It's just like their research could never get them there, basically.
Right. That's it. It would be, to them, it would be laughable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's preposterous. What are you talking about?
Wow.
Yeah, God descending from Mount Sinai with tablets of stone. What in the world? Well, yeah, because the Bible says so.
Right.
And Jesus affirmed it. So
yeah.
And Jesus rose from the dead, and you didn't. So,
Have there ever been cases in your experience where a person has told you about some discovery that sounded sensational? Like, oh man, come on, we haven't really found that. But then you looked into it and it actually did turn out to be legitimate?
Yeah, my entire dissertation, my entire work in my field, I went to Tel El Hammam. I'd heard the story of Sodom. It sounded absolutely ridiculous to me. I got to the top of the ruin at the site and looked out across the plain and saw the city of Jericho on the other side of the river. Like, I think it was, forgive me, I think it's 16 kilometers across, or maybe 8, I forget. Maybe 8 kilometers to the river and then another 8 to Jericho, I forget. But it's not far. You can, on a clear day, when the valley is, windy enough to blow all the smoke out of the way, you can see Jericho, and then Jerusalem is just up there in the highlands, the little Shephelah, and Jerusalem's up there, and you look around at the other ruins that show all of these little tells, the daughter cities, maybe, you look around at all of that, and it just fits together so perfectly. Mount Nebo is directly behind you, and Moses standing up there looking down at the valley, the whole thing fit together. Again, abstractly examining it in the text, you think to yourself, well, whatever, I don't know. It could be here, it could be there. What in the world? When you get there and you can see right through that little cut, there's Bethel and Ai somewhere right over there, and they can clearly see the north end of the Dead Sea. They can't see the south end of the Dead Sea. It's ridiculous. It can't be the south end of the Dead Sea. It's impossible. And you just look at all the remains of the city. So if it's not Sodom, again, you have to ask yourself, what is it? Because it was clearly there. We have occupation going all the way back to Chalcolithic. So it was a big city. So if it's not Sodom, what is it? So for me, Sodom was the one I thought, oh yeah, these guys are nuts. Here's these people. I forget what this term is called. Maybe you can enlighten me. Where you look at something that resembles something and you say, okay, therefore it must be that. So you have a, you know what I'm talking about?
Term's not coming to my mind.
Yeah, it's not to me
I'm
either.
with you.
But they have these they have these signs in Arabic and in English, Lot's wife, and it's this pillar of it's like a sandstone concretion or something, where it's this. I mean, I guess if you squinted and you were on medication, you could look at it and say maybe at one time it could have resembled a person. I don't know. So there's all these things that they try to, tie into the narrative so that they can, say this is definitely the spot. And every single spot that can be tied to a biblical event, you get a whole lot more tourists going there than you do anywhere else.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're saying in the case of Sodom, you're hearing about all this stuff and you're like, oh yeah, right. And then you get there and you're like, whoa, like
this is real.
It all lines up.
It all lines up.
That's so cool. What an amazing experience.
Yeah.
What do you think a layperson in the church, they hear about some new discovery, it sounds really exciting. What do you think that they should look for when they're evaluating? You've mentioned skepticism's healthy, but could you say more about are there any like kind of key indicators that they could watch out for to help them evaluate the legitimacy of a claim?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the crux of the whole matter. I think that's one of the things we've got to be so discerning. We live in a world now full of Wikipedia type information, and there is a reason why in school you don't accept it as a source, because it can come from anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the first thing you need to do with, if you're scrolling Instagram, and we've all done it, you're scrolling Instagram and all of a sudden you happen onto this page and it says found Ark of the Covenant. I think the first thing you need to ask yourself is, who put this out? What school are they associated with? If you start getting to the reporter questions, who, what, why, where, when, how, if you start getting to those questions when you examine something, I think you'll end up turning up. And I say this with the greatest amount of respect. Our motivation should always be learning. We want to be people who, we are called people of the book. It is implied that with that comes a natural curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
That is why Christianity's conquered the world, because we had a natural curiosity that led to the development of universities, that led to the development of hospitals, that led to civilizations, that led to cities and city-states and empires. It's all a result of our desire to be people who are educating ourselves constantly in the natural world, because it all belongs to God. And therefore, we need to have a great deal of discernment when it comes to the sources that we're taking in.
Mm-hmm.
Is this person, I think it's important to ask, is this person a Christian? Is this person being funded by a source that is less than honorable? Is this person who's publishing their work? Are they active? I think if they're a pastor, or they pawn themselves off as an authority in biblical matters, I think it's fair to ask, where do they go to church, and what kind of authority are they under?
Mm-hmm.
Do they have someone they answer to? If you're reading somebody who's a Christian, are you pursuing righteousness? Is all of these things? I think all of these things should be. We need to be skeptical. We need to be discerning. We need to pay attention to who is publishing this stuff. We need to pay attention to who is supporting this. Is this something that's completely new, that no one has ever heard of? Right? Is it brand new stuff? Because if it is, chances are it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a discovery? Okay, well, guess what? Time usually takes care of all of that. Just give it time and see what happens. Is it accepted by the world? Hey, is Sodom a real city? Well, guess what? In 100 or 200, or if the Lord tarries in 1,000 years, if it's in all the history books and it's written down as we think this is probably it, well, then I think you could say with certainty, I think we found it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that you run out and immediately, make your case, because you need to examine things.
Yeah.
You need to be a scientist. You need to approach things in a scientific manner. It doesn't mean, again, that we, don't stress the importance of the supernatural. We all believe in a supernatural world, and we all believe when we die, we go to one or two places. Nothing else. There's nothing outside of that. But the world was created in a manner that we can explore and expose and examine, and that's the beauty and wonder of God's creation.
So a couple things that think I'm picking up on, I can try to recap. On the one hand, you need to be doing good archaeology. You need to make sure that you actually know what you're doing and that you're getting information from people who know what they're doing, just on a purely scientific level, right? If you go on to Wikipedia and there's a claim there and next to it says citation needed, right? It's like, well, literally anybody could have just gone on here and posted this thing, right? And they do, and you have no idea if this person even knows how to do archaeology at all, right? They might have just said, well, this looks like a chariot wheel to me, and really it's a hubcap from a 57 Buick, right? But then beyond that, you also need to be a little bit familiar with the landscape of the conversation, who the publishers are, what voices are these people speaking into the conversation, right?
Motive, yeah.
What is their motive? And does their worldview even allow them to draw conclusions that are consistent with the biblical worldview, right?
Because in archaeology, there's a section in archaeology, we call it the minimalist versus the maximalist debate. It's an old debate.
Okay.
The minimalist minimizes, in effect, the biblical data, and the maximalist uses it in archaeology. So yes, exactly right.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So yeah, is this person even going to consider the possibility that maybe the Bible is true, right?
Right.
Because you could have all the archaeological tools and technology, and you could have a lot of know-how, but if your worldview is just going to say it's just going to rule out God's hand in history, well, we're just not going to get truth if that's our methodology, right? Yeah, okay. I think those are both really important things for us to be aware of.
Another one too, real quick, if I could, I should have covered this in your previous question. I apologize, but another one that has been coming up an awful lot. It's kind of died down. Some of these things recycle. They go through periods of where they get a whole lot of views and then they kind of drop off again. There's a lot of commotion about finding giants.
Okay.
In archaeology, to my knowledge, we have never found a larger than normal sized human being. That's not to say giants don't exist. That's not to say that we take the biblical narrative and try and insert our own naturalistic, imposition on it. We don't do that. But from a historical perspective, archaeologists have never found a human being that is larger than what is reported. And generally, I think the tallest man, if I'm correct, I think the tallest man was 8 foot 11 inches tall. I think he was a Marfans. He had Marfans. He died. I think he was 28 when he died. But we have not found anyone larger than that in archaeology. So no giants. Even though you will see, again, scrolling through your feed, you will see, we found in fact, I saw one just the other day. That's why I'm bringing it up.
Okay.
It shows a man holding a spearhead, and the spearhead it's massive. It's enormous. Well, I think there's lots of explanations that can be given. It might have been a javelin point. It might have been the Romans had trebuchets and crossbows and all kinds of things. It could have been something like that. We don't know. But they're not finding giants. There's no human remains of anyone of that kind of great size that we've found. In spite of what you hear, they're simply not. It's not there.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's an interesting one too, because I could see how a person might want to latch on to there's evidence for giants, and that might justify a particular biblical interpretation, even among people who are Christians.
Conservatives. Right? Yeah, all conservatives, right? Evangelicals, and even within that, you have people like Michael Heiser, and lots of the unseen realm, very, very, very popular stuff. And his work is within the realm of orthodoxy. There's no problem with that at all. It's just physically we haven't found remains of large skeletons.
That's really fascinating to hear.
Yeah.
Maybe as just a final question, if you wanted to give maybe one piece of advice to someone who wants to, they read about a new biblical discovery online and they want to investigate it more, what would be some first steps like very practical? Go here and check this out.
That excellent question. I think so. The guys at Associates for Biblical Research, I'm kind of partial to them because a lot of them are very dear friends. They do really good work.
The name of that organization one more time?
Associates for Biblical Research.
Associates for Biblical Research. Okay.
The Armstrong Institute. They've always done pretty good work too. I think they're kind of affiliated. again, you have intramural squabbles, even among conservative Christians who differ. One of the big ones is the date of the Exodus. I mean, that one's huge. Again, my buddy James Hoffmeyer has a book, Three Views of the Biblical Exodus, and we did not find an underwater sand bridge in the Red Sea. It wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
There's no evidence of that. The Red Sea is 300 feet deep. He said he dove there. In that time, the technology for him to dive is impossible. I don't know what his motive is, but he's not being truthful. So, I think I'm running off away from your question. I'm sorry. Associates for Biblical Research, a very good source. Be very careful of your archaeologists in general. You need to make sure that they're attached to a good school. So you have Steve Ortiz at Lipscomb. He used to be at, I forget, I think it was Southern or Southeastern, I forget which one. But he's evangelical. He's excavating at Gezer, a wonderful, wonderful evangelical Christian man doing great work. You have, I think, my outfit with Dr. Stephen Collins. And again, we're all going to differ on dates of the Exodus, dates of the Pharaoh of the Exodus. There's all kinds of theories, even within conservative Christianity, conservative evangelicalism. You have Brant Wood, who holds to a very hard chronology of a date of 1446, I think, for the date of the Exodus.
Wow.
Other folks, there's a high, mid, and low view. Almost nobody holds the mid view, but there's a high and low view of the chronology of the Exodus. You just need to be aware of where people are,
Mm-hmm.
and just be aware that they're attached to a good school. Be aware that they're attached to somebody that holds to your values. And I think that's the first step in kind of putting away a lot of the
Kind of
frauds.
sensationalism and
phonies. I think that
Well, I think that you have even there just given plenty of names that if a person wants to go investigate this more, they can get into the conversation in a way that's safe, that's going to be credible. And
they put out a wonderful video on YouTube called the Top 10 Archaeological Discoveries of 2025 or 2024. The guy's name is Brian Wendell. He's a pastor up in Ottawa, I think, or forgive me, I don't want to quote that. I think it might be somewhere else.
Sure.
He's in Canada. But he does a great, top 10 list every year.
Oh, awesome.
Talks about each discovery that's found. They're really solid. They're really well researched. And there's no real crazy.
That's really cool.
It's
that would be great to look into.
Very good stuff. Sorry.
That's wonderful. Brian, thank you so much for being here. I love having you on. I feel like I could listen to you just tell archaeology stories all day long. But it's been a lot of fun, and I hope that we'll get to have you back some other time.
You've been very kind. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.